So here we are. You might remember the day after Memorial Day when we introduced you to the program, and the day after that when you first learned about these projects. And we've been working on these projects ever since. I believe you probably know a lot more about them than we knew before, and you've been learning it steadily. I do want to introduce you to two guests that are with us today. In the very back row, Eileen McGinnis, who's a new professor who's going to teach in the workshop next semester. Eileen was Christy Whitman's deputy as governor of New Jersey and did the same work again at the Environmental Protection Agency. So she's worked at the highest levels of state and national government, and she'll be teaching in the workshop in the spring. The Senior Associate Dean, Eric Nelson, who's right here, who is from the School of Professional Studies, where they have lots of capstones. And I said to Eric, come over and take a look at how we do our briefings. And so I wanted you to meet those two folks. What we're doing here today is really the culmination of 2 semesters of work of taking environmental problems and first analyzing the science within the problem and really trying to understand what is the scientific basis of the problem and solution, which is a unique part of your curriculum. You're the only public policy students studying the environment that are required to take environmental science. That's what you did over the summer. We reflected that in the summer workshop, and I believe you still see signs of that, if Matt Palmer is right, in the fall semester workshop, and I believe you do. The science informs how you think about these policy issues, which is really the design of the program. So in our program, we divide up climate and hydrology and toxicology, and all these different pieces are kept separate. And in the workshop, we have to put them all together along with management and policy analysis to come up with workable solutions. You spent the last 2 semesters working together in groups, I think really effectively. The faculty that have already seen these briefings in their earlier version were, to put it mildly, blown away by the quality. These are going to be a great set of briefings. I don't put pressure on the briefers, but these are the best I've ever seen. And I think what it really demonstrates is the hard work and teamwork that's characteristic of this program and that you really epitomize. So I'm not going to talk for too much longer here. I'll have more to say at the very end. But why don't we begin with our first briefing on defying deadly waters.
Good morning. My name is Jake Higdon, and today I will be discussing the federal response to harmful algal blooms, specifically the Harmful Algal Bloom and Hypoxia Research and Control Amendments Act of 2017. I would like to thank my team, managers, and faculty advisor, Professor Rosen, for their guidance and support. First, I will explain what harmful algal blooms are and why we need federal policy to address them. Then I will discuss the objectives of the Amendments Act laid out here and our recommendations for implementing it. Since last November, a red tide, a notorious form of harmful algal bloom, has been terrorizing the ecosystems and economies of the Gulf Coast of Florida. It has caused more than 2,000 tons of dead marine life, like the fish you see here, to wash to shore. Simultaneously, in a different part of the state, a foul-smelling bloom on Lake Okeechobee has caused a $1 billion drop in property values in neighboring counties. These 2 blooms have been linked to similar causes, but they've also been tied to other harmful algal outbreaks elsewhere in the state, illustrating the shifting and dynamic impacts of harmful algal blooms. But Florida is a small piece of the overall picture. Nationwide, harmful algal blooms are a growing and complex phenomenon. As of 2009, they've been spotted regularly in every state in the US. And as you can see from this map, they come in a number of different varieties, many of which are naturally harmful to humans, causing skin irritation or neurological damage, as with paralytic shellfish poisoning. So why are these blooms occurring? Well, algae are a natural and fundamental component of any aquatic ecosystem. They occur in the presence of sunlight, warm water, and nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus. However, human activity can accelerate the presence of these blooms, contributing to the conditions that they favor, such as through nutrient pollution and human-induced climate change. As a result, 75% of all algal blooms in 2018 are expected to be harmful. That means that they are either toxic in nature or they have grown to an extent to which, when they decompose, they deplete the oxygen in the water to the point where marine life struggle to survive, a condition known as hypoxia, or dead zones. The ecological consequences of this are clear, but there are also substantial economic costs. Nationally, the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute estimates that these costs come to about $47 million per year, coming from public health expenses, tourism, and more. But a closer look at the localized costs show that these estimates on a national level are woefully inadequate. For example, in Maine in 2005 alone, the shellfishing industry lost $50 million in foregone harvests. And there are countless other examples of tens of millions of dollars lost from a particular bloom at the state or local level, not to mention the difficult to quantify ecological damage. So federal research is needed to get a handle on the full scope of the consequences of harmful algal blooms. In 1998, the Harmful Algal Bloom and Hypoxia Research and Control Act was passed with unanimous and bipartisan support in order to build out the research and administrative framework for studying harmful algal blooms. The 2017 Amendments Act, proposed by Oregon's Representative Bonamici, builds on this framework, and in particular, it emphasizes increased partnership at a state, local, and federal level, improved research and mitigation tactics, and new funding mechanisms to get money when and where it is most needed. The primary body for overseeing this research agenda has been and will continue to be the Interagency Working Group. The IWG produces annual scientific assessments to Congress and is overseen by the Undersecretary of Commerce and co-chaired by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, and Environmental Protection Agency, EPA. NOAA and EPA are the two main research hubs for harmful algal blooms. There are 11 other agencies and sub-agencies on the IWG, including the Army Corps of Engineers, which is a new formal addition under the Amendments Act. So in order to achieve these overarching goals of improved partnership, research, mitigation, and funding, the Amendments Act issues 5 key mandates, which will serve as the backbone for the program moving forward. They include creating a website in order to better aggregate and provide access to information for the public, adding the Army Corps of Engineers to the IWG in a more formal capacity to improve its accountability, more research on the migration of blooms and the nutrients that cause them between waterways, and national significance, an additional designation that allows for federal disaster-like funds and aid to be deployed for particularly extreme events. Private donations are also allowed for this cause under the Amendments Act. So now that I've laid the groundwork, I want to drill deeper into the details of each of these objectives. Today, the average citizen concerned about the impacts of harmful algal blooms would have a tough time sifting through the different research, data sets, and tools spread out across agency websites and archives. But under the Amendments Act, a new website will be created that aggregates all of this information in one place, improving transparency for the public. Private citizens will have the opportunity to submit and report on harmful algal blooms in their area. And partners at the state and local level, as well as nonprofits, will be able to download data, saving them time and money. NOAA will lead the charge on the website development effort. This will take approximately 11 months to develop a beta version of the site, after which marketing will begin in year 2. The Army Corps has been involved with the IWG for a number of years, but has not been formally accountable to do so. That is changing with this new Amendments Act. With this Amendments Act, the Army Corps will not only participate in IWG events and initiatives, but it will also be responsible for adding a harmful algal bloom-related mission statement to its environmental operating principles and working with the rest of the agencies on the IWG to improve their monitoring capacity. Why is this so important? Well, the Army Corps manages thousands of miles of US waterways. That means that they're in a unique position to exacerbate the causes of harmful algal blooms. And this has actually been the case on the Lake Okeechobee bloom. However, on the flip side, they have the potential to help prevent and remediate blooms by undergoing permitting and infrastructure projects like wetlands restoration, so their accountability to the IWG is critical moving forward. Traditionally, the EPA and NOAA have studied freshwater and coastal ecosystems independently, but we know that harmful algal blooms don't treat these systems independently, and they often migrate and move between the two. Under the Amendments Act, NOAA and EPA researchers will team up to focus on more inter-waterway research studies, looking at issues like the Gulf of Mexico dead zone, which occurs every year and covers thousands of square miles as a result of nutrient pollution that's draining and algal cells that are migrating through the largest watershed in the country. This combined research will inform federal solutions to better address the harmful algal bloom issue. And finally, national significance is a major addition to the authority of the IWG. It allows for federal disaster-like aid to be deployed in extreme events. In the first 4 months, the IWG will define what national significance is and establish standard operating guidelines for the deployment of funds. After this program is set up, it will track the rate at which it receives requests and issues determinations of significance. This will require 3 new staffers at EPA to focus on freshwater blooms and 3 at NOAA to focus on assessing the significance of coastal blooms. The private donations piece is one that will be deferred to year 2, as it depends on the scope of the definition of national significance established by the IWG and the demand for funds throughout the country. So now I want to zoom back out to those overarching goals of partnership, research, mitigation, and funding. Each of the mandates outlined here contributes to one or more of these goals and has intermediary steps within the first year that will allow us to track progress. In total, we estimate that this will come to about $2 million for the implementation of these 5 mandates in the first year. And you can see the breakdown here. This funding also includes the hiring of 9 new staffers across EPA, NOAA, and the Army Corps of Engineers. And this will also require some reallocation of existing scientists to focus on migration. All of these mandates will be undergone in parallel and begun in the first month of the program, but it's important to note that national significance in particular is one that has dependencies in these other areas. So the website creation and potential for private donations in year 2 depends on establishing that definition of national significance in the first 4 months of our program. As we sit here today, harmful algal blooms are threatening individuals, communities, and ecosystems throughout the United States. However, it is difficult to devise a comprehensive federal policy solution for harmful algal blooms. Their behavior is varied. Their causes, like nutrient pollution, are entrenched in powerful political interests, and their ecological and economic costs are severe and not entirely understood today. But with this Amendments Act, the IWG will deploy new digital solutions to build partnership, employ new research and mitigation tactics, and create an innovative funding mechanism, events of national significance, for extreme events. As a result, the federal government will be better prepared to respond to harmful algal blooms in real time and contribute directly to cleanup efforts on the ground. Thank you for your attention, and I will now take any questions.
Thank you, Jake. Okay, so I get very excited when you talk about numbers. So you know I'm going to give you a 2-part question on this. In your earlier slide, you said $47 million as a conservative estimate of damage. I think it was 4 categories: health, tourism, fisheries, and missing the last one, cleanup, right? So I guess I want to ask you a ballpark estimate on the actual damage you think is going on. Maybe you found some research on that. And then 2 is, out of those 4 categories, which one is the most costly? In other words, if we really want to target one of those and you can't do everything, what would you do? Thank you.
Sure. So I'll address the second part of the question first. So estimates today show that public health is the largest category out of the 4 that were outlined there in terms of costs. And I think that moving forward and looking at broader estimates, I don't want to throw out a number sort of with confidence, but I know that for the harmful algal blooms currently happening in Florida, estimates are in excess of $1 billion. So I'd estimate that on an annual year, and that's just costs at the human scale on property values. So I'd estimate in a given year that they can be in the billions of dollars. And then sort of tacking onto that, we have to think about the question of lost ecosystem services, which is almost never included in the estimates that we see on harmful algal bloom costs.
Other question? Okay, take one over here.
So my question is pertaining to this program of designating nationally significant blooms. So you're going to have 6 full-time staff for that, yeah?
Yes.
And then they're going to be tasked first with defining these events and setting parameters, and then going forward, my question is, what is their year-to-year responsibility once they've already defined it? And then do you anticipate that there are events outside of the Gulf and Florida that will qualify, or is this sort of just going to end up being a means of siphoning more federal attention to this crisis region?
Sure. So for each of the agencies, NOAA and EPA, the 3 staff will be comprised of 2 scientists who are assessing the significance and the causes of these blooms, and then 1 administrative staff person who is handling requests for national significance. So after the definition is established, these groups of 3 staffers at EPA and NOAA will receive requests and then make determinations of significance. And the bill does not outline exactly what qualifies. That will be defined by these groups, but it does mention that it's for particularly extreme blooms in terms of their scope and potential economic costs. So if you think about the Gulf of Mexico, for example, it's a transboundary bloom that impacts a lot of different states, so that would certainly fall within the scope. And we believe that other nationally significant blooms are likely to be those on Lake Erie, the Chesapeake Bay, the coast of Oregon, others that impact a number of different communities and potentially spread from state to state, where the clear parties responsible for cleanup are not fully established.
Okay, we have time for one more if there is one. Okay, last question.
It was a great presentation. I'm wondering if there's any mechanism for adjusting the definition of a nationally significant event as things progress, because ideally, with this new framework, there'll be more integrated study, there'll be a deeper understanding of exactly how these things, these blooms can impact those 4 areas that we were talking about earlier. So is there a way that, if after further study, we have a better understanding of exactly how these might impact, and there are impacts that we wouldn't have foreseen before, that definition could change to account for these new developments?
Sure. So I don't foresee, after the establishment of national significance in the first year, much changing within the scope of the first 5 years that are covered by this Amendments Act. And the reason for that is because states and localities will be requesting funding for events of national significance. If that definition is changing over time from year to year, there could be inconsistencies or conflicts over which blooms are likely to receive funds. So the task that we're giving the IWG in the first year is to be as forward-looking as possible in establishing that definition of national significance and publishing it. And then potentially in future amendments, that definition could be revisited.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, before we take a break, I should remind everybody that these bills have not been passed. This is a simulation. They've been proposed, and we're pretending they've been passed. And someday in America, we will pass new environmental laws. I promise you. We used to do it all the time.